Get started. This is our scheduled 10 a.m. media briefing for the flooding within the city of Davenport. My name is David Donovan. I am the Emergency Management Director for Scott County. I'll be leading our press conference today and introducing several other folks that will be speaking to you as well. We're going to ask that you hold your questions until the end. We'll start with a few introductions. First of all, speaking on the response yesterday as well as ongoing operations will be Fire Chief Mike Carlston. Nicole Gleason is the Public Works Director for the City of Davenport. She'll be speaking to Public Works issues, flood protection, and the like. And then lastly, we have Mayor Frank Klipsch, who will also address you today. I do want to introduce a few other folks that are in the room that may assist us when it comes to questions at the end. Corey Spiegel is the City Administrator. Chief Paul Sikorsky is Davenport Police Chief. Tony Kenobi is the Chair of the Scott County Board of Supervisors. We have community partners and nonprofits in the room. Trish Burnett with the Red Cross. Aaron Harland also with the Red Cross. And Major Scott Shelburne with the Salvation Army. I want to start by saying that my office is continuing to monitor the situation both in Davenport as well as up and down the river. We're very fortunate the rain seems to have stopped for now, but excessive rain along with excessive snowpack has led to a situation along the Mississippi River, as we're well aware. We've been in a long duration flood here in the community in Davenport as well as other communities up and down the river, and that's led to some very challenging times for us. We're going to talk about those with you and what we've been doing and what we'll continue to do as well. We continue to work with our partners in the cities of Princeton, Riverdale, Bettendorf, Davenport, Buffalo, as they all have varying levels of flood fight underway right now. Our Emergency Operations Center is open. We continue to provide support for all of those community. I do want to speak to the scope and scale, as there have been some erroneous reports and inquiries about the situation here in Davenport. What the events that took place yesterday, as you'll hear us explain in greater detail, is a problem, a failure, if you will, with a temporary flood protection system that was put in place to protect a portion of downtown Davenport. The breaching of that flood protection system resulted in the incursion of water, which has surrounded several buildings in a 2 or 3 block area within downtown Davenport. Reports of the entire downtown being underwater, the entire city being underwater, are very much erroneous. So with that, I'm going to introduce Chief Mike Carlston, who's going to talk about his response yesterday and his ongoing operations.
As Dave said, my name is Mike Carlston. I am the Fire Chief, Davenport Fire. Shortly after 3:30 yesterday, Davenport Fire received notification that flood water was entering the downtown area. Our crews arrived on scene and we began assessing the situation. Once we were there, we started isolating the area from the floodwaters, and crews were working to relocate people from buildings that were affected by the flood. At this time, we had 2 different locations where we had floodwaters affecting people in buildings. We had 13 people that were moved from the building in the 200 to 300 block of East 2nd Street and River Drive. We also had 17 people that were moved from the buildings to 800 and 900 block of West 2nd and West River Drive. Our crews worked with Mid-America Energy to secure the gas and electric supply to these buildings. We utilized 2 boats from the Davenport Fire Department. We also received mutual aid from Bettendorf Fire and a crew to help us with moving people around. After all the utilities were secured for these buildings, the Davenport fire boats and the Bettendorf fire boats worked to get people back into the buildings that were affected by the floodwaters. We let them back in so that they could gather their pets, gather some personal belongings, and also so they could begin some salvage operations of some of the businesses affected. We had about 30 responders that responded to this incident from Davenport Fire. We had 4 from Bettendorf Fire, and during our operations, we had no reports of injuries. I'd like to turn it over to Nicole at this time.
Nicole Gleason with Davenport Public Works. So there were several contributing factors that led to the breach of the temporary flood system. Primarily, the height of the river water had exceeded any other level that we had used this flood protection before, and the volume of rain. The previous night, we did receive several inches of rain that contributed, and there's also unknown conditions of the underlying infrastructure. Obviously, this road, the sewer systems have all been underwater for upwards of 48 days, and we've just never had anything like this happen before. So once we started having concerns with the flood wall yesterday afternoon, we did work with police and fire to make notification to all of those businesses and residents in the area to ensure that they could make advanced measures if they needed to. And we are now assisting any businesses downtown with filled sandbags. We did have crews filling sandbags all night last night and delivering them as well. We will have other impacted areas potentially. Our water pollution control plant is currently still operating, but once we do reach this level of flood, it stresses the system, and if we do have to close that floodgate, there could be additional sewer backups throughout the city. So we just want people to be on alert for that as well. And we are monitoring all areas of flood protection, all remaining pumps, flood walls, and things of that nature. If people do need sandbags, we do encourage them to call Public Works. We have them on hand and we'll deliver them. Thank you.
Our Emergency Operations Center is preparing to manage volunteers, both the need for volunteers by property owners within the city of Davenport or any of the other river communities in Scott County, as well as folks who wish to volunteer. I do have two phone numbers for you. For persons who wish to volunteer, they can contact 563-484-3086. We have call takers standing by to take their information. And if there are property owners within Scott County, either the city of Davenport or beyond Scott County, or beyond the city of Davenport within Scott County, that need volunteers, they may call 563-484-3098. I am going to emphasize that we are not beginning volunteer operations, but we anticipate the need. That need may not become apparent until the floodwaters begin to recede, and that may take several weeks. So at this time, we don't have any immediate need, although there are some property owners that are looking to begin sandbag operations for potential higher Cress. I am going to emphasize, as Nicole Gleason mentioned, it's unprecedented, the duration of this flood. The ground and the soils here, as well as to our north, remain very saturated. Our partners at the National Weather Service, who we've been working very closely with, continue to caution us that additional heavy rain could certainly result in subsequent Cress and could be higher Cress at this point. It's certainly unknown. It's all dependent on weather patterns over the next 30 days. We do expect that risk to continue for at least 30 additional days. And so for the community of Davenport, as well as all of Scott County, we want property owners in and around the river to remain vigilant, be aware, certainly tune into the National Weather Service. We are currently under local as well as state emergency declarations. Governor Reynolds made that declaration several weeks ago with the flooding at that point, which was already several weeks long. We are working with Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management Division, as well as our partners at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, to pursue a presidential declaration, which could bring additional resources and assistance into the area. At some point in the next week to 10 days, we will be looking to open a multi-agency resource center somewhere in the city, location to be determined. We're looking for that site right now. That location will be a resource center where property owners can go to inquire and apply for various types of assistance. We'll also be working with FEMA should they give us that presidential declaration, as they will come into our community and also potentially offer resources. We don't have dates nor locations. You can certainly continue to monitor Scott County riverfrontema.com, which is our website, as well as the city's website and Facebook pages for both of those organizations, as that information will get posted as it becomes available. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mayor Frank Klipsch.
Well, again, thank you, and I, of course, wish it was under other circumstances that we were all coming together. You know, I think it's important for us to understand that Davenport is a resilient community. A lot of things come and go. You know, we hear about the flood now, but we've also in this area along the Mississippi River Basin experienced droughts as well, not too long ago as well. So we are a resilient community. We come together and do what is necessary. We have a beautiful riverfront. It is one of the gems of not only this area, but the world. People from all over the world come to see our riverfront, and we want to protect our riverfront. We have 9 miles of riverfront. And resiliency means how do we embrace the river, utilize those 9 miles of riverfront to, in fact, not cause problems downriver. I am the co-chair of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. There's 88 mayors from Minnesota all the way to Louisiana, and all of us are concerned about each other. And we'll talk more about that as I move on. You know, we live with this river. It's been the heartthrob of all of us, and we want to not only protect it, but protect our citizens. So working together, and this system that we've used, this temporary flood protection system, has worked well. The last major flood that got up to this level was over almost 26 years ago, and we've handled it all the way along that time. Sure, the parkland gets some flooding, and some of the streets along there, but the city has been protected and continues for the most part to be protected. And as Dave mentioned, this is a part of the southeast corner of our downtown. Any one business, any one citizen is equally important to us. But let's be understanding as we talk about this story, not only locally, but beyond that, the city of Davenport isn't underwater. It's a portion of it, and that's very important to us. And we're going to take care of that. We're going to protect those citizens, and we're going to help them recover. But it's important that it's a part of our community, not all of our community is underwater. And I think the other one, there's so many partnerships to thank, and I'm going to do that in just a moment, because it really is all hands on deck. And I think that's important as we discuss that as we move forward. We've had, you know, one of the great things, I've been in Midwest most of my life and here for over 30 years. And anytime anything happens, everybody comes together. Everybody says, how can I help? What can I do? So to that end, we want to thank Scott County. I've got not only as the chair of the Board of Supervisors here, but Mahesh Sharma, the county administrator, contacted me as well. The Scott Emergency Communications Center, and Dave, of course, in his involvement. The city of Bettendorf, the city of Muscatine, Johnson County, Eldridge, all of them have been involved. The Arsenal, gotten calls from Colonel Marr and the command staff at the Rock Island Arsenal, how can we help? As well, the Corps of Engineers, Colonel Sadinger and Colonel Honard, both contacted me by phone and cell phone. One was in New York, saying whatever you need to do. They had people on the ground last night. The Coast Guard, Iowa Homeland Security. But it's also important, in addition to that, I don't want to let anybody forget our public safety staff. Our police and our fire and our public works people have done a phenomenal job. We had a very rough winter with cold and snow, and then went into the flooding situation, and they've jumped on board and stayed overtime. And I want to thank some of the other surrounding communities who sent people in, and some companies, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. The Downtown Partnership, Kyle Carter and Paul Rumler from the Chamber is here. They're actively involved. The Red Cross, Salvation Army, Mid-American Energy are all involved. There's a number of the Radisson helping to put people up, but also N.J. Miller, Valley Construction, Langman Construction, Tri-City Blacktop. They've all put extra people of theirs to come down and help sandbag and do work last night, and came as a volunteer and did that as well. Tag Communications right there in the corner is helping to provide not only help with the communications, but also places to park and to work with the citizens around there. You know, there's many local businesses that have been impacted. John Deere called the head of their foundation and Global Impact and said, whatever you need, we've got heavy equipment people, we'll send them over and do whatever we need to do to help as well. You know, John Deere, as I said, but also so many other local businesses have stepped up. And we've got to understand that the real heroes of this are the people who live in that area. You know, they stepped up, and they've come to me. I was walking the whole 2nd Street today from the Gain Street and the Centennial Bridge all the way down, stopping and talking to people, and businesses were saying to me, you know, this is tough right now, but we have 98% of our time where we have a beautiful Mississippi River, and we want us to continue to enjoy that. We understand there's challenges, but you're here, the community's here, and we're all ready to support this, and we'll be back operational soon. We'll be back in our apartment soon. That's what this is about. It's a great example, and the story to tell around the country, around the city, around the world is the Quad Cities, Davenport, and the Midwest are where people come together to get things done, and we're in trouble or we have difficulties, we all come together to make that happen. And to that end, I have a meeting with the governor, phone call at 11:30. She'll be in town on Friday. Congressman Loebsack's going to be in the area as well. I think he's coming tomorrow, and he called me last night as well from Washington. Also, you know, I think we actually got a call in Senator Grassley's office, called as well. So all of our delegation is involved, and I actually got a contact from the Intergovernmental Affairs Director at the White House saying, what do we need? We hear you're in trouble. And again, I just want to mention all the mayors. I've had calls through that Mississippi Rivers group from about 12 mayors already saying, what do you need? We understand the challenges you're facing, and we're here to supply help, and all the cities around us are joining that. But we also want to know in this time of challenge, we're willing to go anywhere else to help them too. This is not what you can do for us, but we can do for each other. So we're excited that you're all here. Thank you to telling the whole story of what this is about, of the heroism, the support and hard work of all our public works employees, all these men and women to my left, and also all that are part representing our city, but all the whole community. Scott County and beyond in the state of Iowa realizes we come together and make things happen, and we're in difficulty, we make things get fixed. And when good times are going on, we all come together to make it even better. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up, and if there's any questions, one of us or others will be happy to answer anyone that you might have.
We had some business owners in town who, they said they were warned about the possibility of a floodwall breach yesterday ahead of this happening.
Yes.
Is that true, and what was that like?
Well, we had, again, Chief Sikorsky and his team, and I think, so I'm not sure if, Mike and from the fire department as well, but actually we're going door to door telling people in the building saying there's a possibility you might want to move your cars, you might want to evacuate, do whatever you need to do. We're not sure yet, but we want to have precautions in place and be extra vigilant. So they were told that in advance, and some decided, as in many cases, they left right away. Some said, well, we'll wait and see how this happens. And again, it happened very quickly when that flood wall, the temporary flood system failed, because I think and it was mentioned earlier, the heavy rain on the city side coupled with the 48 days of flood conditions on the riverside really had an impact. So this system works very well. We'll look at how it can be better in the future, but this works very well. And in fact, that was the issue, and we knew there were some challenges. I was with the city administrator and our assistant city administrator walking around downtown yesterday and looking at the areas. Some of those were being supported, and any others we were letting people know in advance.
If you knew that there was possibility of a breach and you had your fire department and police department going around telling people to be prepared, why was there not evacuation before it already was confirmed?
Well, anything is suspect. Any place along any flood protection system has a possibility. So we didn't want to pull people out anywhere along the river, along the flood protection system, just in case, because they would wanted to stay and protect their businesses. One of them was planning on opening yesterday for the first time. So they were intent on staying there and doing what they could with their businesses. We just wanted to say, make sure you're safe, and if in fact there's some things you can do in your place, raising things up, putting things up on the second floor, give them the option to consider doing that. And then as soon as it happened, they were on the scene and everybody was evacuated, those that were left. And many had decided to leave, but most of them, a lot of them had stayed, and we evacuated them when that happened.
Around what time was it when the police and fire started walking around and telling you?
About 2:30, yeah, about an hour or so before the breach, yeah.
Thank you. This happened in the locked area of the
Right.
Is expected to utilize that for how long?
Well, only a much higher power and the weather can determine that.
So roughly, I mean, you said, I believe, the emergency management official said up to 30 days, that the water could still be in that area.
As Mayor Klipp said, it's unknown at this point. It's all dependent on the weather. Obviously, if we're expected to continue to have a normal spring with rain, so I would expect that we wouldn't recede below flood stage, which is 15 feet, which is some 6 feet lower than where we are currently, for up to 30 days. Now, that doesn't mean that those properties are going to continue to be inundated for 30 days. That water that we're there at could recede after 2 weeks. Again, it depends on the rain, and we're not talking about 6 feet of water surrounding those properties. Most of those properties have 18 inches, 2 feet, 2.5 feet of water that they've taken around them at this point. So that's what we were holding back. At its height, we were holding back 5 or 6 feet of water behind that flood protection system. I think it's too early at this point. I think countywide, prior to the breach, we already had over $500,000 in flood protection or emergency protective measures and the like, and that number will certainly skyrocket at this point. It's certainly in excess of several $1 million at this point. It's a little too early to know. And I think the bigger picture is, what is the property loss at this point? You know, the couple $1 million are really the public dollars, you know, the monies that we're expending. Maybe more importantly to our local economy are those private sector losses, right? And so that's why it's very important that we continue to work with FEMA and our Homeland Security partners to try to get that declaration in or get those additional financial resources to our community. We know that recovery is the most important thing going forward. Life and property, you know, obviously come first. We've done what we can. We've certainly safeguarded life. We've done what we could for property at this point. We'll continue that fight, but now we need to try to move into recovery and ensure that we do the best job we can so that we can get back to normal as quickly as possible for our community.
What does the downtown Davenport flood plan say? The protections will be at 22, 23 feet. And what is the next step?
Nicole?
So there's several issues with space constraint in that area that prohibit us from easily being able to extend and deepen that flood wall. So that's obviously something we're going to have to look at more in the future. The forecast did change significantly Monday. It was about 1.5 foot increase we saw due to that heavy rain that came in much higher than forecasted, and that's really what pushed it over the edge. And at that point, we didn't have time to erect another flood wall or move or try to redirect any flood wall at that point. So we'll look at that in the future if we change those levels and those measures. But with the amount of time we had and the forecast change, we did everything we could do to maintain the protection.
Well, you said it went over the edge, but we were told last night by an alderman that the HESCO barrier actually broke through because the sand was so soft and was so compromised. So did the water actually go over the barrier, or did the barrier actually break through?
Our understanding is that the barrier broke through. We can't determine the cause at this point. If it could have potentially been undermined roads, things like that, because of the duration of the flood. We'll know more once the floodwaters recede.
So to follow up on my question about the next step,
Mhm.
you know, we could get another round of heavy rainfall. It could be widespread to the north. Even the hydrologists are always telling us it depends on the rain. Like the mayor said, it's spring.
Right.
It's going to rain. So is the plan now just to let the river flood?
Right, downtown where it is now, we are continuing to provide sandbags and having businesses protect themselves up to the predicted level, which we do have on the screen here. We did install an additional flood barrier in the East Village yesterday as well. So those are some additional measures at this point. And then, and honestly, it becomes splitting hairs the further up you get at this point.
Well, for all those that I've talked to, the answer is no. A lot of them have dealt with this issue. There's one, the Front Street Brewery, has been on the issue right on River Drive, and they deal with it every year. It doesn't get quite this bad. They deal with it every year. It's part of their whole, the heart and soul of what they do is being on the Mississippi River. So I don't see them changing. And again, it's going to be part of our response to say, how can we help them get back into business? And as that happens, then I think they're going to be very solid about it. All that new development happened knowing the businesses were going to be on the river. So I think they're going to want to stay there, but there's going to be some challenges. And as I walk down talking to business owners today, one was saying, I'm going to try to get open on Friday. The Barrow House has said, I think we might be able to get open on Friday. So they're not looking to leaving, they're looking at getting back in operation as quickly as possible.
It might seem premature, but there's one of my people yesterday when we were evacuated, they were asking about a flood wall. Community, why don't we have a flood wall in Davenport? Talk about the cost of that.
Well, I don't have the exact numbers for cost, but again, I think we've talked about it numerous times. The fact of 9 miles of riverfront and our resiliency commitment is a big part of that reason. We decided when the flood of '93 happened, the community decided at that point we're not going to build a flood wall. We're going to in fact find ways, as we have done for the last 26 years, of dealing with the issues. One of the business owners who has a number of businesses said, this is a great community. I love being here, and 98% of the time we love the way our riverfront looks and how we deal with it. So it's a balance of those two things, and our commitment as a community to say we're not going to put up something that maybe permanently keeps the water out of Davenport, but also changes the whole dynamic of our riverfront and causes problems downriver. It will be explored, undoubtedly. I think that's one of our responsibilities as elected officials, is to explore these operations, what they cost, because I think the number is going to be staggering, first of all. But also, is that really what the will of the community is, and the people that have businesses along there, now when they look out their businesses and see the river, potentially not be able to do that and see a wall. Hold on one second. Yes, ma'am?
Down there surveying the land yesterday, was there any point in your mind where you were thinking, I wish I had a flood wall right now?
Well, I mean, that's kind of like after you should have worn a helmet when you're riding a bike and you land on your head. I think at that point, yeah, no. But in my case, no. I realize, as I've talked to mayors all along the river, they have varying techniques, and we've all been discussing, and vigorously discussing, other resiliency efforts that deals with more water. As example, Nahant Marsh, the amount of water that is dealt with at Nahant Marsh prevents it's unbelievable versus letting it even flood more. So is there a way to create some areas like that that can handle water that comes out and be able to lessen the pressure on the city?
With that, following on Elizabeth's question, you said that you talked to several businesses, heard from people who aren't in favor of a flood wall, so to speak. So you're going to look at that. Who are you talking to? Who is saying that? Because we, as the media here, are hearing every day from dozens of people, why is there not a flood wall? Why has the city not done this? And our archives show a city survey in 1993 said 71% of the citizens of Davenport supported a flood wall.
Well, as I said, this is something, any case this comes up, we have a responsibility to look into that in more detail, find the facts on both sides of that equation, and then report that. So at this point, this is hard to have this discussion in the middle of this because it looks apparent. Everybody would say it would be a lot better if there was no flooding. But in the last 26 years, this hasn't happened. So we're going to try to work through that, find out the answers, and then give a report back to the community.
Who are you hearing from specifically? What are those businesses? Who are those businesses? Or those people that are saying this? Because that's not what we're hearing.
Well, you'll have to connect me with those folks because as I've walked along, sure, there are some people that have said, build a wall, and that's been a problem, the thought of that. But as an example, and others have said, a couple of businesses that I've talked to, not a lot because they're in the middle of fighting the efforts and doing what they're doing right now. So we will continue to talk that. That'll be an open dialogue, and we'll be able to find more information as we move forward.
I've spoken with some people, businesses and business customers who feel that, who in particular, but really everyone is downplaying the flooding that's happening in downtown Davenport. We know that the breach happened near Second and Curzon there, but if you look at Second all the way down towards Warren, and you look at the aerial video and footage that's over at the stadium and the City Art Museum, people do feel that this is having a bigger impact on our riverfront businesses than maybe you're saying it has. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's definitely having an impact on the riverfront businesses. But as we looked around there, most of that is either flood protected or a relatively, and again, any one that's jeopardized is too many. I appreciate that. But for the most part, most of those businesses has stayed operational, and within, as we talked about before, if it gets down, loses 5 or 6 feet on the flood level, they'll be back in operational again very quickly. So it's not that something we're not taking lightly, but we're also looking at the entire community, and we wanted to make sure that people from the outside have a tendency to look in and think that the city of Davenport is underwater. It's a portion of it, an important portion of it, but it's just a portion of it. But we understand we have responsibility to everybody in the community as well. So we'll look into that as well.
A little bit about the history of the flood buyouts since 1993 and some of the extensive renovations that we've done in the stadium and other buildings like the Mass Transit Center that are flood protected now that weren't before 93.
I'm not sure if we have someone that can give us specifics of that. We can find more information. I don't have that with me in front of me. But we'll find if we can find more information of that as well. I know a lot of them were made flood resilient. Like you said, the Ground Transportation Center, the Figgy, all of those are open for business today. And like I said, the Barrel House is planning on opening, at least he's shooting for opening on Friday. So those are businesses along that, along 2nd Street and beyond. So we'll look into that. That's something we'll have to take into consideration as we look at the big picture. Well, we'll look at all, if I say we're going to explore it, we'll explore it in detail on both sides of the issue. Find out the results of that. The issue also that building something like this also is related to the Corps of Engineers. There's a whole bunch of people that are involved. It is not a singular decision that the city decides to do something. They have to work with a lot of other organizations, first of all. Secondly, to look at the costs related to that is something we have to deal with, and basically compare that to what potential annual costs there may be as well. So all of those are taken, and what that impact has on the overall riverfront and the development for the future. All of those will be explored and will be part of what our long-term decision will be. So thank you for the question. Right. Chief?
Paul Sikorsky, the police chief. So we do have a security and safety plan in place. We have one as normal operations for floods every year, and then we make adjustments to them. And just this morning, the assistant chief and the patrol captain sent me an update on what our adjustments are for this particular one. So yeah, that's a concern of ours. We have a plan in place, and we have officers, the businesses, owners in our downtown area and the outlying areas that are affected as well see our police cars and officers more often because that is a concern for us. And we have had conversations, Dave has at EMA with National Guard. If those assets are needed, they're certainly available.
You know, to that end as well, follow up also, last night I was down there fairly late, and as I parked to check and see what was happening in some of those affected areas, there were people driving around where I was parked well off close to the water, and somebody drove right around and went in trying to drive through the water, and they were stopped. But I think as well as one of the things that came up today, there's a heavy piece of equipment that's blocking off the street, so that doesn't happen. So I think there are steps being taken. Chief's got plans in place, but also our Public Works Department, overall city has some plans as well. Any other questions?
Can you give more about the multi-agency resource center that was mentioned earlier? What
Dave?
resources are being talked about?
Obviously, we have a community organization active in disaster committee here, COED. It's also called VOED at the national level. There's a state organization, the Iowa Disaster Human Resources Council. And so that brings together nonprofits that have resources that they can bring to bear. So you'll see those nonprofits, those national VOED partners, the Red Cross, Salvation Army, be a part of that. But we'll also bring in faith organizations that have resources to bring to bear. Should FEMA decide to give us a declaration to come to town, you could have their resources there as well. Small Business Administration could be a part of that. It's any number of organizations. Community Action of Eastern Iowa is the servicing organization for the Iowa's Individual Assistance Program, so they would certainly be a part of that. Our Volunteer Registration Center would have folks there as well, so that people could sign up for assistance or volunteer at that location. So it's a one-stop shop where impacted residents can go to look into and apply for assistance that might be available. And it could be any number, anywhere from 8 or 10 organizations up to several dozen organizations.
As Nicole's coming up, all the areas along there are being monitored now, all along the entire edge. So maybe, Nicole, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So any other high levels of creeks or things like that, we are monitoring any significant amount of rain. The system is just honestly at its peak right now. So any significant amount of rain could push creeks over. So everyone really should just be diligent in monitoring the flood conditions in their property right now.
And
The temporary flood wall has fallen, so the water is stabilized around the area where it was going to land once that wall was breached.
Does that water not sit there until the infection is extinct? Could you pump it out, or what are the next steps?
It will likely just stay there until it goes back into its banks at this point. Yeah.
Nicole, is there a specific area of the barrier that you guys are worried about right now? I know you said anywhere in the river, streams, but is there a specific area of the barrier outside yesterday's spot that we're worried about?
There's really the only remaining flood barrier we have up was just erected yesterday in the East Village in anticipation of a 22-foot flood, and we do not have concerns about that.
This took pretty much the entire central barrier down.
Correct.
Excuse me, let me clarify. Entire HESCO barrier right there.
At that area, there was about a 1-block section that fell. The section that remained standing, the water obviously went around it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I think at the time that press release was sent, that was accurate. I think we did have 3 individuals who did spend the night in the shelter here in Davenport. Obviously, there were additional people, but they made other arrangements with relatives or chose to find other accommodations. But 3 people are currently in that shelter.
I don't have an accurate number of all the residents that were displaced. Those were just the residents that we helped out of the area.
Did anybody stay?
I don't believe so. I think utilities have been turned off to all those buildings, so I believe that those buildings are all empty at this point. We have had inquiries about folks returning, whether temporarily to retrieve personal possessions, inquiring when they can get back into their buildings. As I said earlier, many of these buildings have 18 inches of water in front of them. So if they have a second floor apartment, they're high and dry, their property's not in jeopardy. But we have concerns, obviously Mid-American Energy has concerns with restoring utilities, and we have concerns that we're going to want to make sure that those properties are properly inspected before we allow people to take up housing again in those.
I get that. Yep. There's actually the performance group has a trailer right out in front of one of the buildings at Barrel House. So they took all their stuff, put it in there, kept it frozen as they move forward. So I think it's another one of those community coming together and find ways to take care of all the particular situations. Yes, sir. I don't have any specific ones that kind of predated this group, actually. But as you were mentioning, obviously the work that was done at the ballpark, that's a city-owned ballpark, isn't it, the Modern Woodman Park? So that area was dealt with, and we've been able to get in and out of there, changing situations with Canadian Pacific raising the track that changed the situation, and we've dealt with that. And actually, the Ground Transportation Center was flood protected as well by just the way it was developed and designed. Figge Art Museum was built with the idea that Figge's open today and you can go in and use it. The lower area of the parking below it obviously is not parkable at that point, but you can still go in and use it. So I think we've just been sensitive to the idea that as we try to be resilient on our riverfront, people have developed resilient plans to be able to stay operational. And there are some others related to pumping and the area, like in the Garden Addition, some of those areas, and I know Alderman Dunn, who's the alderman in that ward, is there checking it every night himself and make sure all the pumps are working, as an example. So once we see something, we respond to it, deal with it, and new development is being able to help with it. Yes, ma'am. Anything else?
How's the sewer treatment plant doing today? I'm assuming
Nicole?
it's the
Yeah.
same as yesterday.
Yeah, we are monitoring it. We are taking we have employees that are actually in there overnight 24/7 right now, monitoring and taking specific measurements of different things so that we don't have to close that gate until it becomes absolutely necessary to close it to protect the actual infrastructure of the facility. So the gate is technically still open right now, but we are very close to that line and monitoring it minute by minute. Yeah. Yeah, if the gate's closed, it could potentially cause sewer backups depending on what capacity is in the rest of the system. But we don't know exactly specifically where that would happen. Like I said, we are monitoring it minute by minute. Literally with the river level here just about cresting, we're hopeful that we don't have to. So my understanding, and we've had a lot of changes, obviously, in the collection system and the plant itself since 1993. My understanding is that in 1993, at the 22.6, they did not close it at that point. But again, with changes in the system, I can't guarantee what level we would have to do that at this point.
When you say down at the temporary flood area that they're being monitored constantly, who's monitoring that and what they're looking for?
I'm now referring to the ones in the East Village, the ones that were on River Drive. It was our public works staff. We were basically looking for any sort of seepage, things like that would indicate something was going wrong.
In that 20.6?
Correct.
Have you had any increase in the number of people that are monitoring, or is it steady?
So we generally, it's one employee per pump or location like that can visually inspect and see the entire area. So that's generally been around 20 employees that are required at any given time.
Any additional questions? If not, do we have instructions for any future media inquiries for the city? Not at this time? Okay, through the city's communications director, you can also direct inquiries outside of the city of Davenport to Scott County Emergency Management Agency. As I said, we continue to work with other communities outside of Davenport. If there are any media inquiries for those other communities, please work through my office rather than responding. Those cities all have very small staff. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning.